The song we're hearing is All Night Long. Shelton Brooks wrote it in 1912. He was 26 at the time and living in Chicago, where ragtime was giving way to swing. This vaudevillian entertainer would perform in musical reviews in Chicago, New York, London, and Paris, and even participate in a Royal Command performance. But it wasn't his stage performances that set his place in musical history. Instead, it was his songwriting that influenced dance and music of his time and generated American jazz standards still performed today. Join me as I explore the history of pianist and composer Shelton Brooks and his 1912 song All Night Long in this episode of Playing in the Domain with me, Thena Bloom. To begin, some background on Shelton Brooks. He was born May 4, 1886, in Amherstburg, Ontario, Canada. A young Shelton is said to have taught himself to play his family's pump organ with the help of his brother, who worked the pedals.
A pump organ uses air pumped through the instrument to produce sound by causing a piece of thin metal to vibrate, acting sort of like a large harmonica. These organs were more portable than a pipe organ and were popular and widely used during the 19th century in small churches and homes. Shelton Brooks' brother was probably pumping the pedals for him, supplying air to create sound as Shelton played the keyboard.
His father preached at the Nazarene African Methodist Episcopal Church in Amherstburg.
The Nazarene AME Church was an important destination of the Underground Railroad. Built in 1848 by a growing black community, the church provided a place of temporary shelter for those fleeing slavery in America. The church also operated a school, providing an education to people for whom it was once denied. The building is operated today as part of the Amherstburg Freedom Museum and recognized as one of Canada's National Historic Sites.
Brooks' family moved to the United States in 1895 and settled in Ohio. As a young man, Brooks played piano and sang in Detroit cafes and nightclubs. He also performed on the Chicago-Detroit vaudeville circuit, where he was known for both music and comedy. Just in case any of you are unfamiliar with vaudeville, it was basically a variety show with different individual acts taking their turn in the spotlight. Vaudeville, which originated in France, became a popular form of entertainment in the U.S. and Canada beginning in the 1880s and continuing through the 1930s. The lineup for such a show might include singers, dancers, individual comedians and comedy duos, jugglers of all kinds of objects, recitation of poems, or scenes from a Shakespearean play. Some of the more unusual acts booked at a vaudeville theater or tent show might include physical feats and acrobatics, or even a guy playing a cat piano. Some vaudeville theaters may have been picky, trying to book top talent, while others may have been a tent show with a free-for-all lineup. In any case, the vaudeville circuit was a good place for entertainers to work out their material, or in the case of Brooks, try out new songs. Brooks married Lena Boyd, June 11, 1909, in Cuyahoga, Ohio. They moved to Chicago possibly that same year, where he continued to perform in clubs and vaudeville theaters. He also began writing songs that were garnering attention, and most importantly, getting published.
Staying in time.
Some other things going on in 1912 when Brooks penned our featured song All Night Long. New Mexico and Arizona became states. Oreo cookies were introduced to the U.S. The Titanic sank. Suffragettes marched in New York City May 6 as they campaigned for the right of women to vote. Harriet Quimby became the first woman to fly across the English Channel. The next year, in 1913, Brooks became a father when his wife Lena gave birth to their only child, Shelton L. Brooks, Jr., who also became an entertainer. The city of Chicago in the 1910s was in the midst of an economic boom, with a population of over 2 million and growing. A spider web of train tracks stretched out in all directions from the city. Skyscrapers of a thriving downtown business district marked the skyline. Model Ts, horse and buggies, streetcars, and pedestrians fought for the right-of-way in the city's streets. The Illinois Central Railroad published a booklet in 1912 called Chicago and the Tourist, promoting the city as a summer resort destination. They declared the city's hotels, restaurants, entertainments, waterfront resorts, and inland beaches to be among the best in the world. People from across the country and the world were coming to fill jobs in the steel mills, the stockyards, manufacturing plants, warehouses, and the lumber mills. Among those coming were African-American musicians moving from southern cities like New Orleans to play in nightclubs and dance halls of Chicago. They were part of what would later be known as the Great Migration, in which Black Americans fled the restrictive and sometimes dangerous Jim Crow South of the United States, seeking jobs and better opportunities in the North and West. And a self-reliant Black community was emerging in Chicago's South Side. The musicians who made their way to Chicago in the early decades of the 20th century shaped and influenced jazz and dance in America and the world. Some of Brooks' contemporaries playing Chicago at the time included trumpeter Louis Armstrong, cornet player Joe King Oliver, and piano players like Joe Jordan and Ferdinand Jelly Roll Morton. The nightclub scene in Chicago then featured ragtime, blues, and big band music. People were dancing the foxtrot, the grizzly bear, and the cakewalk, a rejection of formal waltzes and other European dances of the Victorian grandparents. Chicago nightclubs and dance halls were some of the first to have tan clubs that served both Black and white patrons. The Pekin Club, which operated from 1905 to 1911, was said to be the first African-American-owned theater and vaudeville stock company in the U.S. Brooks was among the players at the Pekin, appearing in 2 shows in 1911, and fellow ragtime piano player Joe Jordan also appeared there. According to a past exhibit at the University of Chicago entitled From Dreamland to Showcase, Jazz in Chicago, 1912 to 1996, 2 important Chicago jazz venues opened in 1912. Pompeii Buffet and Cafe, later named the Richelieu when Jelly Roll Morton became its musical director, and Café de Champion, a prototype of high-class, racially integrated cabarets of the 1920s and 30s. So Chicago was growing with people and industry and hopping and jumping with music in the 1910s, and Shelton Brooks was part of it, contributing tunes for people to sing and dance to. Let's talk a little bit about his song All Night Long. Let me make it clear, Shelton Brooks' song All Night Long is not to be confused with Joe Walsh's All Night Long, or Lionel Richie's All Night Long, or Mary J. Blige's, or Machine Gun Kelly's, or anyone else's All Night Long that is not Shelton Brooks. I found an early copy of sheet music for All Night Long at the University of Maine's website. There's several online resources at universities that offer access to free digital collections where you can download copies of public domain sheet music. The subject of All Night Long is a typical one, missing someone you're madly in love with and can't stand to be without. It's not like people in 1912 could just text a sweet message to let their sweetie know they were still thinking about them. The cover of this particular sheet music has an artist's depiction of a young woman draped in a flowing nightgown, looking longingly out of a window as the moonlight pours in. The credits identify the model for this artwork as Grace Wilson and report that this song was originally introduced by her on the vaudeville stage, where she was known as the Girl with a Million Friends for her natural and warm stage performances. The All Night Long sheet music I found was published in 1912 by Will Rossiter of Chicago. For people considering purchasing this music, the publisher pointed out that this was the same Shelton Brooks who wrote the Sophie Tucker song Some of These Days several years before. Tucker, a funny, brash, big, bold blonde, created a huge hit for herself and Brooks in 1909 when she sang Some of These Days. She adopted the tune as her theme song and sang it for 55 years, even using its title for her autobiography. Sheet music was a big business at the turn of the 20th century. And just as artists keep track of how many records and albums they sell, or how many song downloads they have now, artists and publishers then were aware of how many pieces of sheet music were purchased. People would buy sheet music of popular songs they heard from touring vaudeville shows and later the radio. They wanted to learn the melodies and rhythms of their favorite artists. During the ragtime era, it was not unusual for a middle-class family to have a piano in the parlor. The guitar and ukulele were also popular with amateur musicians during this time, and the sheet music I found includes the tuning for a ukulele. Gathering around the piano for a sing-along was a common occurrence, the karaoke of its day. I found a 1913 record with Ada Jones and Billy Murray singing All Night Long as a duet. Here's a sample. Ada Jones, another vaudevillian, was billed as a comedian, and the way this is performed seems a little comical to me. I can imagine her with pouting lips as she's singing it. She and Murray, who, yes, was a well-known vaudeville star, take turns with the verses and echo the refrain all night long. The words on this Victor label record were a bit altered from the lyrics I have, and we found other recordings where words were changed. Brooks had moderate success with All Night Long, and some other vaudeville stars sang it and recorded it. Brooks continued to come up with popular numbers, including ones that made people want to move. Dance songs written by Brooks included Walking the Dog. Here's an instrumental from 1916 by the Six Brown Brothers. And Shelton Brooks co-wrote I Want to Shimmy with lyricist Grant Clark. That song was featured in the 1918 summer edition of Ziegfeld's Midnight Frolic. His 1917 song Darktown Strutter's Ball, about an annual dance event, became an instant hit, and several recordings were made that year. The song was picked up immediately by dance bands and is still covered today. Here's a sample of that from Fats Domino, who first recorded it in 1958. In October 1920, while working at Chicago's Panama Amusement Company, Brooks contributed songs and was leading man in several shows rewritten for black audiences that were revivals of white shows. After Chicago, Brooks moved to Queens, New York, and was living there in 1920 according to the U.S. Census. Brooks was invited to be in Lou Leslie's Plantation Review. Leslie put together the review using the best numbers from floor shows he produced at the Plantation Club. Leslie paired Brooks up with a popular young singer from the club, Florence Mills. The Plantation Review opened on Broadway in 1922 at the 48th Street Theater. Brooks was master of ceremonies and billed as America's most popular composer. A version of the show was taken to London and renamed Dover Street to Dixie. The Dover part of the show was the first half, in which all British acts performed, and the African-American cast performed the second half. The American company was invited to give a Royal Command performance. The show was reworked and renamed Dixie to Broadway and opened again in New York, running 8 weeks in 1924. Shelton Brooks was said to be the bright spot of the show by one reviewer. Shelton starred with Florence Mills for a fourth time at a Harlem theater in Lou Leslie's Blackbirds Review in 1926. Blackbirds also went to London and Paris. Sadly, into the shock of family, friends, and fans, Brooks' stage partner Florence Mills died of tuberculosis in November 1927. She was 31 years old. Shelton Brooks worked with other female singers who became familiar names. He recorded with blues singer Sarah Martin in 1923 and accompanied singer Ethel Waters on piano in 1926 for a couple of records. He appeared on radio co-hosting a bi-weekly CBS program in 1930. That same year, he collaborated with pianist Joe Jordan and Porter Granger on the song Don't Leave Your Little Blackbird Blue for the Broadway show Brown Buddies, in which Brooks had a small role. He did a little work in the movies, appearing in the 1939 film Double Deal as himself and performing his comical song Hole in the Wall.
Yeah, I expected that. No matter where you travel around, you'll always find in every town a place where the real gang hang around. It's rather small, they always call it the hole in the wall. Say you see why.
He was also cast in the 1941 comedy film Up Jumped the Devil. He continued to make stage appearances throughout his life. He performed at the Apollo Theater in 1942. He moved to California in the 40s and was part of Blackouts, a salute to burlesque that ran for 7 years in Los Angeles. Songs written by Shelton Brooks were performed and recorded by popular jazz and blues musicians of his day, such as Louis Armstrong and Cab Calloway, and years later by artists like Bing Crosby, Billie Holiday, Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Brenda Lee, and many more. Some of Brooks' songs, in addition to becoming popular jazz standards, became country and bluegrass standards. Here's an example of another version of All Night Long from country blues guitarist Frank Hutchinson. In a 1957 article published in the San Bernardino Sun, Brooks reflected on his career. He was 71 at the time and still receiving royalty payments from his songs. The article's headline referred to him as retired, but at the end of the interview, he mentioned that he was still writing songs and lamented that lots of people wrote songs that would never be heard or produced or published. Our podcast highlighted a song from his early songwriting career of the 1910s, but I also found a couple of clips of Shelton Brooks from the 1970s which I'd like to share. I consider footage like this to be precious, as these were some of the last performances before his death. One performance I found online, held January 31st, 1970 at the Wilshire Ebell Theater in Los Angeles, was called Where It Was, and billed as the second annual Ragtime Happening.
The Where It Was concert series was produced by Dick Zimmerman, a ragtime pianist and historian who was a key figure in the worldwide revival of ragtime in the 1970s. Zimmerman used Where It Was to bring together veterans like Brooks and younger ragtime players. He was also the first person to record the complete works of ragtime legend Scott Joplin.
At the beginning of his performance in Where It Was, we see Brooks' profile in silhouette on a backlit screen. He's in top hat and tails and holding a cane. By way of introduction, he says that ragtime was popular, but was just dying out when he started to play, and he liked the kind of music they call swing, which was on the rise.
Shelton Brooks is the name.
He says, before stepping out into the spotlight, tipping his hat, and taking a seat at the piano. He adds, after he plays a few numbers, he hollers, and his son, Shelton L. Brooks Jr., appears on stage. He plays a couple of his dad's songs, but is quick to tell the audience he does not compare himself to the great ragtime piano players like his father. How fitting for pianist Joe Jordan to also be part of this special concert night, when you think about how he and Brooks both played at the Peak and back in Chicago in the 1910s and later collaborated. In another clip I found online, Shelton Brooks appeared in the 1972 primetime TV special Sun City Scandals, along with other pianist-composers including Matty Malnick, Harry Ruby, Sammy Fain, and Irving Caesar. You should look them up. This was the second Sun City Scandals special. The first aired in 1970. Hosted by Johnny Carson, each show featured veteran entertainers of music, film, and stage who were in their 70s and older. You boomers and Xers may remember Carson as the host of Late Night with Johnny Carson, before Jay Leno, before Conan O'Brien, and before current host Jimmy Fallon. In this 1972 clip, the stage is full of pianos, and a tuxedo Carson introduces each performer who play and sing one or two of their best-known hits. Brooks is at the 4-minute, 20-second mark, but I think the entire clip, which is about 12 and a half minutes, is worth watching. In his performance, Brooks plays and sings his most popular tune, Some of These Days, the same song the music publisher mentioned in promoting the sale of his 1912 song, All Night Long.
Shelton Brooks, the Dean of American Songwriters. Shelton is 85.
I wrote for Miss Sophie Tucker.
Shelton L. Brooks died on September 6, 1975, at the age of 89, and he was inducted into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2005. Finally, here's our house band, the Domain Players, with their version of All Night Long from Riverbend Studios. enjoyed learning about this public domain song, we encourage you to seek out videos and audio of performers mentioned on this podcast. You'll find some historic and interesting performances out there on the web. Thank you for listening. This has been Playing in the Domain with Thena Bloom. Bye, y'all.
The information in this podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The songs featured were published in 1925 or earlier. The creators have made every reasonable attempt to verify the accuracy of the information provided and the public domain status of the featured songs. However, using this or any podcast as the basis for your PhD dissertation or term paper is not advised. That's on you. The producers are solely responsible for the content of this program. The people, organizations, businesses, or services mentioned or recommended have not endorsed this podcast and their inclusion should not be construed as such. For more information about the public domain, visit the U.S. Copyright Office at copyright.gov. Playing in the Domain is a Riverdin Studios production, copyright 2021.
Come join us now for a stroll down memory lane. Gather round people cause Thena Bloom is playing in the domain. Playing in the domain. Playing